What if the happiest place on earth isn't Disneyland, but a small Himalayan kingdom where GDP is measured by gross national happiness? I'm about to take you on a journey to one of the most mysterious countries on the planet, where monks dance with masks, chili peppers are considered vegetables, and tourists pay $200 a day just to enter. This is Bhutan, and I'm going to show you what life is really like here on just $500. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why this tiny kingdom might just have cracked the code to true happiness, and why the rest of the world is desperately trying to learn their secrets. But here's what nobody tells you about Bhutan. While everyone talks about gross national happiness like it's some magical fairy dust that makes everything perfect, the reality is far more complex and infinitely more interesting. This isn't a story about a perfect society where everyone lives in blissful harmony. It's about a country that made deliberate choices about what matters most. And those choices come with real costs and real benefits that will challenge everything you think you know about progress, success, and what it means to live a good life. I've spent the last month here, not in luxury hotels or guided tourist experiences, but living with actual families, eating at local establishments that don't even have signs, traveling on public transportation that would make your local bus system look like first-class luxury, and trying to understand how a country smaller than Switzerland has managed to remain carbon negative while the rest of the world burns itself to death chasing economic growth. The answers I found will surprise you, frustrate you, and maybe even change how you think about your own life. Most people couldn't point to Bhutan on a map if their life depended on it, and honestly, that's exactly how this country likes it. Tucked away between India and China like a secret garden that someone forgot to tell the modern world about, Bhutan is smaller than Switzerland but feels like stepping into another dimension entirely. For centuries, this kingdom kept its doors locked to outsiders, and even today, getting in requires jumping through more hoops than applying to Harvard Medical School while blindfolded. The government calls it high-value, low-impact tourism, which is bureaucratic speak for we'd rather have a few respectful visitors than hordes of Instagram influencers trampling our sacred sites while complaining about the Wi-Fi speed. But this isolation wasn't just about keeping tourists out. It was about preserving something that the rest of the world was losing so fast we didn't even notice it was gone until places like Bhutan showed us what we'd sacrificed. This isn't just any ordinary country trying to balance tradition with modernization. Bhutan is the world's only carbon-negative nation, meaning they actually absorb more carbon dioxide than they produce. While the rest of us are arguing about whether climate change is real and whose fault it is, these guys solved it decades ago by making it illegal to cut down more trees than you plant. The Constitution literally requires that 60% of the country stays forested forever. Imagine if every country had that kind of foresight instead of treating environmental protection like an optional luxury we'll get around to after we finish making money. The last king voluntarily gave up absolute power to establish a democracy, which is like finding out that someone actually returned a lost wallet with all the money still inside. The current king is basically what would happen if a Disney prince became an actual monarch who genuinely cares about his people instead of just looking good in ceremonies. He married a commoner, speaks multiple languages fluently, and regularly travels to remote villages to understand local problems firsthand. When was the last time you saw a world leader do that without a camera crew and political agenda? But here's where the story gets really interesting, because Bhutan's approach to governance challenges every assumption we have about how countries should operate. Instead of measuring success through gross domestic product like every other nation on Earth, they measure progress through gross national happiness, which sounds like hippie nonsense until you spend time here and realize they're actually onto something profound. The 4 pillars of gross national happiness are sustainable development, environmental conservation, cultural preservation, and good governance. Notice what's missing from that list? Individual wealth accumulation, corporate profits, and economic growth at any cost. This doesn't mean they're anti-business or opposed to prosperity, but they've created a system where economic decisions are evaluated based on their impact on community well-being, environmental health, and cultural integrity rather than just how much money they generate in the short term. The concept of gross national happiness might sound like idealistic political rhetoric until you spend a day with an actual Bhutanese family and see how these principles translate into daily life. I wake up at dawn in a traditional farmhouse where 3 generations live under one roof, and the first thing that hits you is how different morning sounds here. No honking cars stuck in traffic jams, no construction noise starting at 6 a.m., no sirens racing to handle the latest urban crisis. Just the gentle chanting from a nearby monastery, mixing with roosters doing their thing and wind moving through barley fields that have been tended by the same family for generations. The grandfather, wearing his traditional jicho robe that looks like a bathrobe but functions as practical workwear perfectly designed for this climate and lifestyle, is already tending to crops while his daughter-in-law prepares Suja, that famous butter tea that tastes like liquid comfort food and serves as breakfast, coffee, and hand warmer, all rolled into one steaming cup of mountain wisdom. What strikes you immediately is how slow everything moves, but not in a lazy or inefficient way. People here seem to have mastered something we've completely forgotten in the West: the art of being present in whatever they're doing, instead of constantly multitasking and thinking about the next thing on their endless to-do lists. The grandmother spins prayer wheels while telling stories to her grandchildren, not because she has to kill time or entertain kids, but because that's how wisdom gets passed down through generations when you don't have Netflix and YouTube doing the job for you. There's no rushing to check phones every 5 minutes because, honestly, half the villages don't even have reliable internet, and the half that do use it more intentionally than we're used to. Instead of scrolling through social media looking for dopamine hits from strangers' approval, kids play traditional games in the courtyard while their parents discuss community decisions that actually affect everyone is daily life. When someone has a problem, whether it's a sick animal, a leaky roof, or a family conflict, the entire neighborhood gets involved in finding solutions. The women here wear these gorgeous traditional dresses called kiras, which are basically elegant wraparound garments that make every woman look like royalty while remaining practical enough for farm work, hiking mountain trails, and everything else rural life demands. What is fascinating is that wearing traditional clothing isn't some tourist show or government mandate reserved for special occasions. People genuinely choose to dress this way because it connects them to their heritage, and, more practically, because these designs have been perfected over centuries to work perfectly in this specific climate and lifestyle. The men's gos look like bathrobes to Western eyes, and I'll admit, I thought they looked ridiculous until I watched how gracefully a Bhutanese man moves in one while climbing steep trails, working in fields, and navigating formal ceremonies. The design is perfectly practical for this environment, with hidden pockets, adjustable layers for temperature changes, and a dignity that makes Western casual wear look sloppy and thoughtless by comparison. Family structure here operates on principles that would blow your mind if you're used to Western individualism and the nuclear family model that isolates people into tiny units struggling to handle everything alone. Children don't move out at 18 to find themselves in college while accumulating massive debt and learning to function as isolated economic units. They stay, contribute to the family business or farm, and gradually take on more responsibility while remaining connected to the support system that raised them. Elderly parents aren't shipped off to nursing homes where strangers provide basic care while families visit occasionally out of guilt. They're considered the wise counsel of the household, consulted on major decisions, and cared for with genuine respect and affection. It's not perfect, and younger generations are starting to question some traditional restrictions. But there's something beautiful about watching a family function as an actual cooperative unit, rather than individuals who happen to share the same address while pursuing separate goals. The spiritual aspect isn't some surface-level meditation retreat nonsense designed to help stressed-out Westerners feel better about their consumption habits. Buddhism here is woven into daily life so naturally that you barely notice it until you do, like suddenly realizing that every interaction is guided by principles of compassion, mindfulness, and consideration for consequences that extend beyond immediate personal benefit. Every meal begins with a small offering to hungry spirits. Every journey starts with prayers for safe travels and protection for all beings. And every major decision involves consulting the local monk, or at least considering spiritual implications alongside practical ones. But it's not oppressive or restrictive in the way religious fundamentalism can be. It's more like having a built-in pause button that reminds people to consider consequences beyond their immediate desires and to treat other beings with respect and kindness. Now, let's talk about food, because Bhutanese cuisine will either convert you into a spice-loving devotee or send you running for the nearest McDonald's easy. Except there aren't any here because fast food chains are basically banned along with tobacco, plastic bags, and other things they've decided don't contribute to gross national happiness. The national dish is called datshi, which is chilies cooked with yak cheese, and when I say chilies, I mean enough heat to make a Mexican grandmother respect your spice tolerance and question your life choices. These people don't use chili as a spice to add flavor to other ingredients. They use it as a vegetable, as the main component of meals, as a source of vitamins and nutrients essential for high-altitude living. A typical lunch might include red rice that's nutty and substantial, dried yak meat that tastes like the mountains themselves, fermented vegetables that add probiotics and complex flavors, and enough chilies to fuel a rocket ship to Mars while clearing your sinuses for the next decade. The first time you try authentic Bhutanese food, your mouth will feel like it's been attacked by tiny fire demons with a personal vendetta against your taste buds. But something magical happens after a few days of culinary torture. Your palate adapts, and suddenly you understand why these flavors exist and why they're not just tolerated, but genuinely loved by people who have other options available. The high altitude and cold climate make spicy food not just delicious, but physiologically necessary for keeping your body warm and energized. When you're working in fields all day at 10,000 feet elevation or hiking mountain trails that would challenge a mountain goat, you need food that packs a serious nutritional punch and provides internal heating that keeps you functional in conditions that would leave most people shivering and exhausted. Plus, the spices have genuine medicinal properties that become obvious once you experience them. Chilies boost circulation, aid digestion, provide vitamin C that prevents scurvy during winter months when fresh vegetables are scarce, and create endorphin releases that improve mood and energy levels naturally. It's not masochism, it's practical medicine disguised as cuisine. Local markets are where the real food magic happens, and they're completely different from the sanitized grocery stores we're used to. Vendors sell everything from dried yak cheese that looks like small rocks but tastes like concentrated mountain meadow, to fermented vegetables that smell questionable but add incredible depth and complexity to any dish. Women sit behind piles of chilies sorted by heat level and intended use, each variety serving specific culinary and medicinal purposes that have been understood for generations. A full meal from a local vendor costs maybe $2 and consists of portions that would feed a family of 4 back home, made with ingredients that are fresher, more nutritious, and more flavorful than most $20 restaurant meals in Western cities. The secret is that everything is local, seasonal, and made with ingredients that have been grown in the same soil for generations, developing complex flavors and nutritional profiles that mass-produced food can never match. Suja, that butter tea I mentioned earlier, deserves its own detailed explanation because it's basically liquid gold in Bhutan and represents everything that's different about how people here approach nutrition and hospitality. Imagine if tea, yak butter, and salt had a baby, and that baby was raised by Himalayan mountains while being taught ancient wisdom about how to keep humans alive and healthy in extreme conditions. It sounds absolutely disgusting on paper, like something you'd be forced to drink as punishment for losing a bet. But when you're hiking at 12,000 feet elevation and someone hands you a steaming cup of Suja, you'll understand why Tibetan cultures have been perfecting this recipe for centuries. It's not just a drink, it's a meal replacement that provides calories, protein, and essential fats, a hand warmer that prevents frostbite, and a social bonding experience that creates connections between strangers. The preparation is an art form that involves churning tea with butter and salt until it reaches the perfect consistency and temperature, then serving it in small cups that you're expected to sip slowly while engaging in conversation. Refusing Suja is considered incredibly rude, like rejecting someone's hospitality and cultural identity simultaneously. But once you acquire the taste, you'll understand why people here drink gallons of the stuff and remain healthy, energetic, and emotionally balanced in conditions that would destroy most modern urban dwellers. Street food here is a revelation if you know where to look and aren't afraid of eating at places that don't have health department certificates or English menus. Momos, those steamed dumplings filled with meat or vegetables, cost about 50 cents each and are perfect little packages of comfort food that somehow manage to be filling, flavorful, and nutritionally complete. Local women set up simple stalls along busy streets in Thimphu, and watching them fold hundreds of momos with machine-like precision while maintaining perfect quality control is absolutely hypnotic. The secret is in the dough thickness, which has to be thin enough to cook properly, but thick enough to hold the filling without breaking, and the seasoning blend, which every family guards like state secrets and passes down through generations of perfected recipes. Each vendor has their own style, their own combination of spices and techniques, creating subtle variations that locals can identify like wine connoisseurs distinguishing between vineyards. But here's where things get really interesting when we start talking about relationships, gender roles, and dating in Bhutan, because this is a country that challenges every assumption you might have about traditional societies and women's rights. This is a place where women traditionally inherit property, not men, where land and wealth pass from mother to daughter, creating a completely different power dynamic than what most of us are used to in patriarchal societies. Women here aren't fighting for equal rights because they never lost them in the first place. They own the land, make major family financial decisions, and often run businesses while men handle physical labor or work in government positions. This isn't some recent feminist victory or modern progressive policy. It's ancient tradition that recognized women's central role in maintaining family stability and community continuity across generations. Dating in Bhutan exists in this fascinating space between ancient traditions and modern influences that are seeping in through internet access and contact with the outside world. In rural areas, marriages are still often arranged, but not in the oppressive way you might imagine from movies about traditional societies. Families suggest potential partners based on compatibility, shared values, and practical considerations. But young people have veto power and plenty of time to get to know each other before making any commitments. The process involves extended courtship periods where potential couples spend time together in group settings, family gatherings, and community events, allowing them to evaluate compatibility without the pressure and artificial circumstances of modern dating culture. It's less about romantic passion and more about finding someone you can build a life with, raise children alongside, and grow old with while maintaining respect and affection. In the capital city of Thimphu, which has about 100,000 people and feels like a small town compared to most national capitals, dating looks more familiar to Western eyes, with young couples meeting at cafes, through social media, and at social events. But even modern Bhutanese dating retains emphasis on family approval, long-term compatibility, and shared commitment to traditional values alongside personal happiness. What's refreshing is how little gender-based violence exists here compared to neighboring countries with similar economic development levels. Bhutanese culture emphasizes gentleness, respect, and nonviolence as core Buddhist principles, but also because communities are small enough that bad behavior gets noticed and addressed quickly by social pressure rather than legal intervention. Women walk alone at night without fear. Children play outside without constant supervision, and domestic violence is rare enough to shock communities when it occurs. The younger generation is caught between preserving traditions that have worked for centuries and embracing modern ideas about individual freedom, career advancement and personal fulfillment that sometimes conflict with collective responsibility. Some young women are choosing careers over early marriage, studying abroad and bringing back new perspectives about gender roles, professional advancement, and work-life balance. This creates interesting tensions within families, but most parents seem surprisingly adaptable and supportive. They want their children to be happy and successful, even if that means changing some old patterns and expectations. The key is maintaining respect for core values like family commitment, community responsibility, and spiritual development, while adapting surface practices to changing circumstances. International dating is virtually non-existent simply because so few foreigners live here long-term, and the ones who do are usually involved in specific development projects or educational programs that don't provide many opportunities for casual social interaction. But the few Western expats who do stay often report that Bhutanese partners bring levels of emotional stability, family commitment, and spiritual grounding that are increasingly rare in individualistic Western culture. The flip side is that individual freedom and personal space, things we take for granted in Western relationships, can feel suffocating if you're not prepared for the collective nature of Bhutanese society, where major decisions involve extended family input and community considerations alongside personal preferences. Now, let's dive into one of the most spectacular aspects of Bhutanese culture that you absolutely cannot understand from photos or videos: their religious festivals. If you've never experienced a Tshechu festival in person, you haven't truly experienced Bhutan, because these aren't tourist performances or cultural shows designed for entertainment. They're genuine religious celebrations where entire communities come together to celebrate the triumph of good over evil, wisdom over ignorance, and spiritual development over material attachment. The visual spectacle is absolutely mind-blowing in ways that would overwhelm your senses if you were not prepared for it. Picture hundreds of monks in elaborate silk robes that cost more than most people's annual income, performing ancient dances while wearing hand-carved wooden masks that represent different Buddhist deities, demons, protectors, and spiritual concepts. Each mask is a masterpiece that takes skilled artisans months to create, carved from specific types of wood, painted with natural pigments, and blessed in elaborate ceremonies before being used. The masks themselves tell complex stories that most visitors completely miss because they don't understand the religious symbolism involved. The peaceful deities have serene expressions and gentle colors, representing compassion, wisdom, and enlightenment. The wrathful deities have fierce expressions and dark colors, representing the fierce compassion needed to destroy ignorance and protect spiritual development. The demons and evil spirits are ugly and terrifying, but they're not evil in the Western sense. They represent human emotions and mental states that cause suffering: greed, hatred, jealousy, pride, and ignorance. Each dance movement has a specific meaning developed over centuries of spiritual practice and artistic refinement. Monks train for years to master these performances, not just the physical movements but the spiritual states they represent. When you watch a properly executed sacred dance, you're seeing meditation in motion, spiritual principles expressed through physical form, and centuries of accumulated wisdom transmitted through art rather than words. The performances can last for days, with different dances representing different aspects of spiritual development and different stories from Buddhist scripture and Bhutanese history. Monks will dance for hours without breaking character, sweat pouring down their faces under heavy masks and elaborate costumes, but maintaining perfect spiritual focus and artistic precision. Some dances represent the journey of the soul after death through various spiritual realms. Others celebrate the victory of wisdom over ignorance, or the protection of the Dharma against spiritual corruption. The most powerful moment in any Tshechu is when the lead dancer removes his mask to reveal the peaceful face of the Buddha, symbolizing the removal of all earthly illusions and the revelation of enlightened consciousness. The entire crowd falls silent, and you can feel the spiritual energy shift as hundreds of people simultaneously contemplate the deepest mysteries of existence and their own potential for spiritual awakening. Between dance performances, the entire community shares massive communal meals prepared by volunteers who've been cooking for days using ingredients donated by local families and businesses. Everyone contributes something, whether it's food, money, labor, or simply their presence and participation. Rich government officials sit next to poor farmers, educated professionals alongside illiterate elderly people, all sharing the same simple but delicious food while children play at their feet and teenagers flirt with each other under the watchful eyes of protective grandparents. It's socialism in action, but the organic kind that grows from genuine care for community well-being rather than political ideology imposed by government bureaucrats. People contribute not because they're forced to, but because community success directly affects individual well-being, and individual success is meaningless without community support. These festivals also serve as massive social networking events where young people meet potential marriage partners, families arrange business deals and settle disputes, and communities make collective decisions about local issues that affect everyone. In a country without many forms of mass communication or entertainment, festivals become the primary way information spreads between remote villages, news gets shared, and social bonds get maintained across geographic distances. Gossip, marriage proposals, business opportunities, political discussions, and spiritual teachings all happen alongside the religious celebrations, creating this incredibly rich social experience that serves multiple purposes simultaneously. It's like if church, family reunion, business conference, dating service, and entertainment festival all happened at the same time in the same place with the same people. The economic reality of living in Bhutan is where things get really interesting, especially if you're trying to survive on $500 like I attempted. The official line that tourists always hear is that visitors must pay $200 per day minimum, which includes accommodation, meals, transportation, and a mandatory guide. That's the tourist track, carefully designed to keep visitor numbers low while ensuring that tourism money actually benefits local communities rather than just international hotel chains and foreign tour operators. But what about locals? How do they actually live on incomes that would be considered poverty wages by Western standards? And could a determined foreigner survive here on a tight budget if they were willing to live like actual Bhutanese people rather than demanding Western amenities and comfort levels? The answers are complicated and reveal everything that's different about how economic systems can function when they're designed around community well-being rather than individual wealth accumulation. Most rural Bhutanese families live on what would be $50 to $100 per month in cash income, but their actual standard of living is much higher because so many necessities are provided through non-monetary systems. Housing is often inherited property that's been in families for generations, or built collectively by communities using traditional techniques and local materials that cost almost nothing but require significant labor investment. Food comes primarily from family farms, community gardens, and local markets where prices are kept affordable through government subsidies and cooperative purchasing arrangements. Basic necessities like soap, clothes, and household items are incredibly cheap by Western standards, but more importantly, they're built to last for years rather than being designed for planned obsolescence. A traditional Bhutanese robe might cost $30 but will last decades with proper care, while a modern synthetic jacket might cost less initially but need replacement every few years. The trick to budget living is understanding that you can't maintain tourist expectations and pay local prices. Hotel rooms designed for foreign visitors cost $30 to $50 per night and provide Western-style amenities, but a bed in a local guest house or staying with a family might cost $5 and provide a much more authentic cultural experience, along with better food and more interesting conversations. Tourist restaurants charge $10 to $15 for meals designed to satisfy foreign palates with familiar ingredients and sanitary standards that meet international expectations. But local family-run establishments serve more authentic, nutritious, and flavorful food for $2 per meal. Assuming you can handle spice levels, that would challenge a dragon, and do not mind eating with your hands while sitting on cushions on the floor. Transportation follows the same pattern. Private vehicles with professional guides cost hundreds of dollars per day and provide comfortable, safe, efficient travel to scenic destinations with English-language commentary and flexible schedules. But local buses and shared taxis cost almost nothing if you're willing to travel on local schedules to local destinations, except that journey times are suggestions rather than guarantees, and don't mind sharing intimate space with families, their luggage, and occasionally their livestock. Internet and phone service are surprisingly affordable and reliable in urban areas, though rural coverage can be spotty during bad weather. A local SIM card costs about $5 and provides enough data and minutes to last weeks, assuming you use technology the way locals do for communication and information, rather than entertainment and social media addiction. Basic smartphones are available for under $100, and most young Bhutanese people are as connected to digital communication as teenagers anywhere else in the world, though they tend to use different platforms and have different online habits than we're familiar with. Social media here focuses more on family updates, community news, and educational content rather than personal branding and lifestyle performance. The real challenge for budget living isn't money, it's access to the informal systems that make affordable living possible. Most cheap housing options require family connections, community relationships, or long-term commitments that aren't available to short-term visitors. Affordable food requires knowing where to shop, how to cook traditional dishes, and which vendors provide the best value for specific items. Inexpensive transportation means traveling on local schedules to destinations that serve community needs rather than tourist attractions, often involving early morning departures, multiple transfers, and flexible arrival times that don't work for people on tight schedules. You can absolutely live in Bhutan for $500 per month, but you'd be living like a Bhutanese person with strong community connections, not like a Western backpacker expecting familiar amenities and services. Healthcare deserves special mention because it represents one of Bhutan's most impressive achievements in balancing traditional practices with modern medical science. Medical care is completely free for all citizens and surprisingly high quality considering the country's economic development level, though facilities in remote areas are obviously more basic than urban hospitals. What makes the system unique is how it integrates traditional Bhutanese medicine with Western medical approaches, giving patients choices about treatment methods rather than forcing them to choose one or the other. Every hospital and clinic employs both Western-trained doctors and traditional healers who use herbal medicines, meditation techniques, and energy healing practices that have been refined over centuries. Patients can choose their preferred treatment approach or combine both methods, and government insurance covers everything equally. Traditional medicine excels at treating chronic conditions, mental health issues, digestive problems, and preventive care, while Western medicine handles emergencies, surgery, infectious diseases, and acute conditions that require immediate intervention. Many Western visitors are shocked to discover that traditional treatments they would dismiss as pseudoscience actually produce measurable, reproducible results, especially for problems like anxiety, chronic pain, and digestive disorders that Western medicine often struggles to address effectively without significant side effects. Education reflects Bhutan's broader commitment to preserving cultural knowledge while preparing students for participation in the modern global economy. All children receive free education through university level, learning both English and Dzong as primary languages, with curriculum that includes traditional subjects like Buddhist philosophy alongside practical skills like computer programming, environmental science, and international business. Universities offer degrees in everything from engineering and medicine to traditional arts and sustainable development, and many graduates choose to remain in Bhutan rather than seeking opportunities abroad. which is unusual for developing countries where brain drain typically undermines local development efforts. Rural schools might lack fancy equipment and high-tech resources, but they consistently produce students with strong critical thinking skills, deep cultural knowledge, and genuine enthusiasm for learning that comes from small class sizes, teachers who know every student personally, and education being viewed as a community responsibility rather than just a government service that parents consume passively. Parents volunteer classroom time, local experts teach specialized skills that aren't available in textbooks, and successful graduates regularly return to mentor younger students and contribute to their community's educational development. It's education as community investment rather than individual competition for limited opportunities. Transportation in Bhutan deserves extended discussion because it perfectly reflects the country's unique approach to balancing practical needs with environmental protection and community values. First, there are no traffic lights anywhere in the entire country. Not one. Instead, police officers direct traffic at major intersections in Thimphu. And everywhere else, people navigate through patience, courtesy, and common sense that would never work in aggressive urban environments, but functions perfectly in a culture that values cooperation over competition. The roads themselves are adventures that challenge every assumption you have about modern transportation infrastructure. Most routes follow ancient trading paths that wind through mountain valleys and climb over high-altitude passes that reach over 12,000 feet elevation. These aren't highways in any sense we'd recognize from developed countries. They're narrow, mostly unpaved tracks that cling to mountainsides like they're afraid of falling into the valleys below. During monsoon season, landslides regularly close major routes for days or weeks, and everyone accepts this as part of life rather than a crisis requiring immediate government intervention. No one honks angrily or demands emergency repairs. They wait patiently, help clear debris if possible, find alternative routes that might add days to their journey, or simply postpone travel until conditions improve. Local transportation operates as a masterclass in community cooperation and resource sharing. Shared taxis function on informal schedules, picking up passengers along established routes until vehicles are completely full, and I mean completely full in ways that would violate safety regulations in Western countries. 10 people in a car designed for 5 is normal. 15 is not unusual. Everyone shares the cost equally, making long-distance travel incredibly affordable. But you need to be comfortable with intimate physical proximity to strangers and completely flexible about timing. These drivers possess knowledge that GPS systems and modern navigation technology can't replicate. They know every shortcut, every bridge condition, every weather pattern affecting their routes, and every local contact who can provide assistance if vehicles break down or roads become impassable. Riding with them is like accessing a human network of local intelligence that has been developed over generations of practical experience. For longer distances, buses connect major towns and cities, but they operate more like mobile social clubs than efficient transportation services. Passengers bring food to share with strangers. Children run up and down aisles making friends and playing games. Elderly people dispense wisdom and life advice to anyone willing to listen, and teenagers practice English conversation with foreign visitors. Journey times are suggestions rather than reliable schedules because drivers stop to help broken-down vehicles, wait for late passengers who are walking from remote villages, take extended tea breaks whenever the mood strikes, and adjust routes to accommodate passenger requests or road conditions. It sounds inefficient, but it creates social connections and community support systems that make travel safer and more enjoyable than sterile commercial transportation. Walking and hiking remain primary forms of transportation in rural areas where many villages are accessible only by foot trails that can take hours or days to traverse. But these aren't grim survival marches through hostile wilderness. Bhutanese people have turned walking into an art form, creating trail systems that maximize scenic beauty while connecting communities as efficiently as possible given the challenging mountain terrain. Every few hours along major trails, you'll encounter tea houses where locals gather to rest, share news from different villages, and offer hospitality to travelers regardless of their destination or ability to pay. These informal rest stops function as communication networks, emergency assistance stations, and social centers that maintain connections between isolated communities. The absence of personal vehicles in rural areas isn't primarily due to poverty, though economic factors obviously matter. It's also practical choice based on environmental conditions, infrastructure limitations, and cultural values that prioritize community cooperation over individual convenience. Why own an expensive vehicle that requires constant maintenance and expensive fuel when everything you need is within walking distance? Roads are too narrow and dangerous for casual driving, and community transportation systems work reliably and affordably. Urban areas are seeing increases in personal vehicle ownership, especially among younger professionals and government employees, but even in Thimphu, many people prefer walking or cycling because distances are manageable. Traffic moves slowly enough to be pleasant rather than stressful, and parking is limited by deliberate urban planning policies designed to prevent the traffic problems that plague other developing cities. Bhutan's natural attractions and spiritual sites are legendary among the few travelers who manage to visit, but experiencing them requires understanding that this isn't a country designed for casual tourism or Instagram photography. Everything here demands physical effort, cultural respect, and spiritual engagement that goes far beyond superficial sightseeing. Take Tiger's Nest Monastery, probably the most famous and photographed location in Bhutan. This incredible structure literally hangs off a cliff face at over 10,000 feet elevation, and reaching it requires a serious 3 to 4 hour round-trip hike that challenges most visitors' fitness levels and acclimatization to high-altitude conditions. But calling it just a hike completely understates the spiritual journey involved. The trail winds through ancient pine forests where colorful prayer flags flutter from every tree branch, creating rainbow canopies that filter sunlight into constantly changing patterns of color and shadow. Every few hundred yards, you encounter small meditation caves where monks have practiced for centuries, some still actively occupied by hermits who have taken vows of silence and dedicated their lives to spiritual development. The air gets progressively thinner as you climb higher, forcing you to slow down, breathe more deeply, and pay attention to physical sensations in ways that naturally create meditative states even if you're not particularly interested in spiritual practice. Your heart rate increases, your breathing deepens, and your mind gradually shifts from everyday concerns to immediate physical and emotional experience. When you finally reach Tiger's Nest after hours of steady climbing, the visual impact is overwhelming. But the real transformation comes from understanding what this place represents in terms of human dedication and spiritual aspiration. Legend says that Guru Rinpoche, the saint who brought Buddhism to Bhutan, flew here on the back of a tigress and meditated in these caves for 3 years, 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days. Whether you believe the flying tigress story or interpret it as a spiritual metaphor, standing in those meditation caves and feeling the accumulated energy of centuries of prayer, meditation, and spiritual practice is a profound experience that changes how you think about human potential and the relationship between physical and spiritual development. The monastery itself represents a marvel of engineering, artistic achievement, and religious devotion that required generations of believers willing to do whatever was necessary to create this impossible structure. Every piece of wood, every stone block, every gold ornament, every religious artwork was carried up that cliff by human hands. No machinery, no helicopters, no modern construction equipment, just people who believed so strongly in the spiritual value of this place that they were willing to dedicate their lives to building and maintaining it. The monks, who live here full-time, are some of the most peaceful, centered, and genuinely happy people you'll encounter anywhere. They've mastered the art of finding profound contentment through simplicity, service, and spiritual practice in conditions that most modern people would consider impossibly austere and challenging. Dochula Pass, at over 10,000 feet elevation, offers panoramic views of the entire Himalayan range on clear days, including several peaks over 24,000 feet that look close enough to touch but are actually dozens of miles away. But this isn't just a scenic overlook designed for tourist photography. It's a sacred site marked by 108 Buddhist stupas, each representing different aspects of spiritual enlightenment and serving as focal points for meditation and prayer. Local families regularly make pilgrimages here to offer prayers and seek blessings for important life events like births, marriages, business ventures, and spiritual undertakings. The site maintains constant activity of quiet ceremony and spiritual practice that adds profound meaning to the spectacular mountain scenery. The hidden valleys scattered throughout Bhutan feel like lost worlds where time moves according to natural rhythms rather than human schedules. Some can only be reached by hiking for days through high-altitude wilderness, passing nomadic yak herders who live exactly as their ancestors did centuries ago, following seasonal migration patterns and maintaining traditional relationships with the natural environment. These aren't preserved museum pieces or cultural theme parks designed for tourist entertainment. They are living communities that have consciously chosen to maintain traditional lifestyles because they work better than modern alternatives in their specific environmental and social circumstances. The people living there have access to modern technology and global information, but they've decided that traditional practices provide better quality of life for their particular situation. What strikes visitors about all these natural and spiritual sites is how seamlessly they integrate environmental conservation with religious significance and community life. Bhutanese people don't view nature as something separate from human existence that needs to be either conquered for economic benefit or protected from human contamination. They see natural landscapes as physical manifestations of spiritual principles, deserving respect and careful stewardship because they're literally sacred ground that supports both physical and spiritual well-being. This isn't environmental policy imposed by government regulations or international pressure. It is genuine cultural belief that has kept Bhutan's wilderness pristine and its communities sustainable for generations, while providing local people with meaningful livelihoods and deep spiritual satisfaction. Safety in Bhutan is one of those topics that seems almost boring to discuss because there's so little crime or violence to analyze. This is genuinely one of the safest countries on Earth, where people routinely leave doors unlocked, children walk alone through forests to attend school, and losing your wallet usually results in someone tracking you down to return it with all contents intact. The murder rate is so low that individual cases make national news and shock the entire population. Theft is uncommon enough to be remarkable when it occurs. Violent crime is virtually non-existent. Sexual assault rates are among the lowest globally. Drug addiction and alcoholism exist, but at levels far below global averages and without the associated crime problems that plague other societies. Part of this safety obviously comes from Buddhist principles that emphasize nonviolence, compassion, and consideration for others' well-being. But practical social factors matter just as much. Communities are small and interconnected enough that everyone knows everyone else's business, making it nearly impossible to commit crimes without being immediately identified and held accountable by social pressure. Extended family networks create strong support systems that identify and address problems before they escalate into criminal behavior. Economic inequality exists but isn't extreme enough to create the desperation that drives most property crime. Social institutions like monasteries and community organizations provide alternative paths for people who might otherwise turn to antisocial behavior. The justice system emphasizes restoration and rehabilitation rather than punishment and incarceration, focusing on repairing social relationships and addressing underlying causes of problematic behavior rather than simply imposing penalties. This approach works because communities are cohesive enough to provide the social support necessary for successful rehabilitation. Mental health support integrates traditional practices like meditation, community counseling, and spiritual guidance with modern therapeutic approaches, providing multiple pathways for people struggling with psychological problems that might lead to antisocial behavior in other societies. The visa situation and tourism regulations represent Bhutan's most controversial and misunderstood policies, designed to balance the economic benefits of tourism with protection of cultural integrity and environmental sustainability. Getting a standard tourist visa requires booking through a licensed tour operator, paying the sustainable development fee that's currently around $200 per day, and accepting that you'll have a government-approved guide throughout your entire stay. This system exists to ensure that tourism revenue actually benefits local communities rather than flowing to international corporations, that visitor numbers remain within environmental carrying capacity limits, and that cultural sites receive respectful treatment rather than being overrun by insensitive tourists taking selfies and leaving garbage. However, there are alternative pathways for people genuinely interested in deeper engagement with Bhutanese society rather than superficial sightseeing. Students can apply for educational visas to attend Bhutanese universities, participate in research projects, or engage in academic exchanges that provide legal long-term residence while contributing to local educational and development goals. Volunteers can work with local NGOs, environmental organizations, healthcare providers, and educational institutions on specific projects that address community needs while providing foreigners with authentic cultural immersion experiences. These positions are competitive and require specific skills, but they offer legal residence, meaningful work, and deep cultural engagement at costs far below tourist rates. International development organizations, UN agencies, and diplomatic missions occasionally offer internships, fellowships, and employment opportunities that provide legal residence while contributing to Bhutan's development objectives. These positions typically require advanced education, relevant experience, and long-term commitments, but they offer unique opportunities to understand Bhutanese society from inside rather than as an external observer. The key to any extended stay is demonstrating genuine respect for Bhutanese culture, fluency in relevant languages, and willingness to contribute positively to local communities rather than extracting experiences for personal benefit. This isn't a country where you can arrive with a backpack and figure things out as you go. Successful long-term visitors typically spend months or years preparing, learning language basics, researching cultural customs, and establishing connections with local sponsors or organizations before attempting to obtain visas. Working legally as a foreigner requires specific professional skills that address Bhutan's development priorities, typically in fields like healthcare, education, engineering, environmental science, or sustainable development. Salaries are modest by Western standards but sufficient for comfortable living by local standards, and the real compensation comes from participating in one of the world's most interesting social experiments in balancing tradition with modernity. The hidden truth about happiness in Bhutan is more complex, fascinating, and instructive than the simple narrative of a blissful Buddhist kingdom where everyone lives in perpetual contentment. Yes, the focus on gross national happiness has created measurable improvements in quality of life, environmental protection, social stability, and community cohesion that other countries are studying and attempting to replicate. But this isn't a utopia where everyone skips through mountain meadows in states of constant bliss, and it's not a perfect society without problems, conflicts, or individual suffering. Real happiness here comes from fundamentally different sources than we're accustomed to in Western individualistic cultures, and understanding these differences reveals both the possibilities and limitations of alternative approaches to human flourishing. Happiness in Bhutan is less about personal achievement, material accumulation, or individual freedom to pursue whatever desires arise, and more about community connection, spiritual grounding, environmental harmony, and finding meaning through service to others and future generations. These are sources of satisfaction that remain relatively stable over time, rather than the temporary emotional highs we get from buying new things, achieving personal goals, or having exciting experiences. Young Bhutanese people face genuine challenges as they navigate between traditional expectations and modern opportunities that sometimes conflict with family obligations and community responsibilities. Some feel constrained by social pressure and limited individual autonomy. Others struggle with restricted economic opportunities in a country that deliberately limits development to preserve cultural and environmental integrity. Mental health issues exist here just like everywhere else, though they're typically addressed through spiritual practice, community support, and traditional healing methods rather than individual therapy and pharmaceutical intervention. Depression, anxiety, and other psychological problems occur, but they're understood and treated as community concerns rather than purely personal medical conditions. The sustainability model that makes Bhutan carbon negative and environmentally pristine requires genuine sacrifices and long-term thinking that can be personally challenging for individuals who want immediate gratification or rapid lifestyle improvements. Economic growth is deliberately constrained, which means fewer material luxuries, limited career advancement opportunities, and slower improvements in living standards compared to neighboring countries that prioritize rapid development. This trade-off works for most Bhutanese people because they've been raised with values that prioritize collective well-being and long-term sustainability over individual optimization and immediate pleasure. But it's not effortless or automatic, and it requires constant cultural reinforcement and community support to maintain these priorities against pressures from global consumer culture and individual ambition. What Bhutan has truly mastered is the art of making decisions based on collective well-being and long-term consequences rather than short-term individual benefit or immediate economic return. This creates a different kind of happiness that's more stable and sustainable than the emotional roller coaster of constant individual striving that characterizes modern Western culture, but it comes with costs in terms of personal freedom and individual choice that not everyone finds acceptable. After spending weeks here living on a $500 budget, staying with local families, eating exclusively local food, traveling on public transportation, and participating in community life rather than tourist activities, I can confirm that it's absolutely possible to experience authentic Bhutan affordably if you're willing to completely abandon Western comfort expectations and embrace a local lifestyle completely. The real cost isn't monetary. It's the psychological and cultural adjustment required to appreciate a completely different approach to organizing human society around values that prioritize community cooperation, environmental stewardship, and spiritual development over individual wealth accumulation, personal convenience, and material consumption. Would I return to Bhutan? Absolutely, but not as a tourist seeking exotic experiences to photograph and share on social media. I'd come back as someone genuinely interested in learning from a culture that has developed practical solutions to problems that are destroying other societies: environmental degradation, social fragmentation, economic inequality, and spiritual emptiness that comes from organizing life around consumption rather than contribution. Bhutan isn't a destination you visit to escape your real life or collect interesting experiences. It's a place that shows you what human society could look like if we organized communities around different values than the ones driving most of the modern world toward environmental collapse, social isolation, and individual despair disguised as freedom and progress. The hidden truth about happiness that Bhutan reveals isn't really hidden at all. It's visible in every interaction where people prioritize relationships over efficiency, every meal shared with strangers who became friends, every moment of genuine presence instead of digital distraction, every decision made with consideration for how it will affect the seventh generation of descendants rather than just immediate personal benefit. The question isn't whether Bhutan has discovered some secret formula for human happiness that the rest of the world is missing. The question is whether other societies are willing to prioritize community well-being, environmental health, and spiritual development over individual wealth, technological convenience, and endless economic growth that's rapidly making our planet uninhabitable for future generations. If this journey through Bhutan's unique approach to organizing human society around happiness rather than just economic productivity has challenged your assumptions about progress, success, and what constitutes a good life, let me know in the comments what surprised you most about their cultural choices and whether you think other countries could learn from their example. And if you want to see more deep explorations of places where ancient wisdom meets modern challenges, subscribe for future adventures that go beyond surface tourism. To understand how different cultures address universal human problems in ways that might change how you think about your own life and priorities.